Welcome back to another Waynos Fotos video, and if you've been watching any of these online magazines, they've been crowing about how clincher tyres are so much faster than the standard being used by most of the pros, which is tubulars. And they've also been telling us about a new technology where Victoria are actually using a noodle and been putting this into the tyre, which is actually giving them the ability to ride on a flat tyre for some distance. Well, are these claims really true, and are these tyres really the new standard in the pro peloton? Now, the first thing that they're saying is that these clincher tyres, or the latest design of clincher tyres, are 10 to 12 watts faster than a tubular tyre. Now, I don't know where they get these figures from, but if you go and look at some rolling resistance charts, that doesn't seem to be true. It seems to be somewhere about half of that. So we're talking about, around about 5 watts difference between the same brand of a clincher tyre compared to a tubular tyre. Now, of course, these slightly vary between PSIs, and also it depends on the drums that they're using to test them. But the reality is the watts are pretty small. They're single figure watts, which is really hard to feel when you're riding your bike. Now, this 5 watts increase that they're getting really comes down to the hysteresis of the tyre. Now, the hysteresis is the amount of energy that you get back when you put that into the material. So, if I drop a tennis ball, it actually compresses the ball. So the ball actually compresses like this and then comes back again and the ball bounces. Now, if you've ever got one of those super balls, it's a really high type of rubber, you can throw it on the ground really hard like this, and it bounces really high, and that's because its hysteresis that it loses is very low, so it actually gives back a lot of the energy that's put into it. Now, this is what they're actually measuring, and this is why they're saying that they're 5 watts faster. But is this really the full story here of how a tyre performs on a road? We really have to ask, is hysteresis the full story? Yes, if you do these tests, you can actually claim that these tyres are faster. And generally, something that gives you a better response to hysteresis is a tyre that's actually thicker and more dense, because it will transform the energy back when it's actually compressed. And like a tyre that's made out of cotton, obviously won't, because the cotton basically bends, and without air pressure in it, it has a very bad hysteresis. And a lot of the most expensive tyres are actually cotton sidewalls with a very, very high, threads per inch. So why are we running these tyres, and why have they been saying them for years that they're a faster tyre? Well, this is something we need to look at, because there is actually 2 components which actually affect the actual speed of the tyre. Now, the hysteresis is one of them, but also when you actually ride on a road, if the road surface is actually rougher, and you can actually feel this when you're riding along, you feel it in the bike, what it's doing is you're trying to ride up and over that imperfection on the road, you're actually having an upward force, which is energy being used to lift you and the bike up. Now, if you've got a tyre that's actually softer or a lower pressure, then it actually absorbs this energy into the tyre, and you're not lifting the whole bike, or not lifting it as much. So you actually go faster, and this is actually being proven. I mean, even on a lot of these online, cycling magazine sites, they've actually proved this, where they've gone to the Pavé in France, and they've got bikes and they've lowered the pressure, and they're actually faster. So there's a lot of factors that affect on different surfaces of what's faster and what's not faster. Vegan cyclists did a really good test, and the reason why I like this test is because the results were not really conclusive. Now, to me, that either shows one of 2 things. He hasn't got a clue what he's doing, or really all this tyre performance really makes very little difference. And I think it's the latter, because I think he did a pretty good job from watching the video, and I think he tried to keep the controls as consistent as possible in the real world. Now, if we actually dive a little bit deeper into the figures, you can see that they were really, really close. So in the whole scheme of things, it really makes little difference if you're running the cheap tyre to the expensive tyre. So people who are money conscious, you might as well run the actual cheapest tyre. Now, why is this? Now, the reason is because even if you go back to these online magazines and you say, hey, look, 10 to 12 watts, man, you got to buy these tires. You got to run what we're saying. You know, these Clinchers are the fastest. What they don't tell you is that 10 to 12 watts is a linear wattage, or it doesn't vary that much across the speed of the bicycle, say from, you know, going very slow to going very fast. But what does vary dramatically is the wind drag of your body and the bicycle. So once you start to get above about 10 or 12 kilometers an hour, the most of the actual energy you need to overcome is actually the drag of the air, not the tire rolling resistance. So at slower speeds, the rolling resistance becomes a bigger percentage of the performance as it would at, say, 20, 30, 40 kilometers an hour. So that really shows up in his test, because the actual fastest tire was the actual dearest tire, but going up the hill, which would have been at a much slower speed. So that's where you're going to gain on a more expensive tire, is in climbing at slower speeds. But at the higher speeds where it was just rolling, it really made a little difference. In fact, it looked like the actual cheaper tire, which would have had better hysteresis, was actually faster. So what we really have to conclude from all this, that really rolling resistance really makes very, very little difference when you're riding at normal speeds of, say, 20, 30, 40 kilometers an hour, because the actual percentage is very, very tiny compared to the amount of air drag that's being caused from you trying to push your body and bicycle through the air. What is actually more important is actually the diameter of your front wheel in relation to your front rim. It's actually been proven that if you actually match this, you actually get quite a big aero advantage, especially if you're running, you know, deep dish wheels. Now, this is actually probably the bigger, you know, advantage. So if you've got a large tire, which is actually the trend at the moment, and your rim's not wide enough, you get a detaching of the air from the tire going onto the rim. And this actually causes turbulence, which is drag. But if the tire is smaller and the rim is slightly wider, so you're running like a 23 or 21 mil on the front, then you can actually have a better, you know, match where the air comes off the tire onto the rim and there's less turbulence caused. And this actually gives you a big advantage, because aero advantage is exponential whilst rolling resistance is linear. So you could actually get a bigger advantage, because rolling resistance gives you more performance at a lower speed, but at a higher speed, your aero gives you a bigger advantage. So should pros ride Clinchers or Tubulars? Well, I suppose when it comes down to the actual speed on a smooth surface, it doesn't make a lot of difference. But one thing that is a big deal is these new disc brake bikes are actually quite heavy. And if you try and take the weight out of the bike in other areas, it actually compromises either the stiffness of the bike, or, as we've seen in the handlebars, you know, the strength of the handlebars. But if you take it out of the tyres running Tubulars, then it actually doesn't impact much, because Tubulars are a proven technology. So it's a much easier way to get the weight of the bike down. And also, Tubulars have the advantage that you can actually run the tyres much softer as well, because you don't have to worry about them coming off the rim, and you don't have to worry about pinch flats. So you can actually run Tubulars at a much lower pressure, which has been proven to be faster on surfaces where there's pave or it's a rough surface. But if you're riding on a good surface where it's like a hot mix surface, it probably really makes very little difference. So it comes down to their choice and product they want to push on the market. So in conclusion, why are we paying to ride these really expensive tyres? Well, the problem is that probably for a nice smooth road, we're probably wasting our money. But what people don't realise is when you start to go on surfaces that have imperfections, so if you're riding on chip seal, or you're starting to ride on surfaces that are not probably the best type of surface, that's where these cotton tyres, or the tyres with the softer sidewalls, actually have an advantage. And the reason why that is because the actual effect of hysteresis actually works against you in those cases, because what it's trying to do is push you on the bike up and down, up and down, up and down. So you're losing energy with that upward force. Whilst if you're running a tyre that has a very soft sidewall, and you can actually run it at lower pressures, the tire's actually going like this, and your bike is actually moving less up and down like this because you're like gliding over. And this has been even proven in a number of tests over the years. So what the actual reality is those expensive tires that have got those very high TPIs are actually better on surfaces which aren't the best surfaces, whilst a cheaper tire which has a much harder and stronger sidewall, which has a better hysteresis, are actually going to be faster on a harder surface. So it depends, and it depends on what you're riding on and what surfaces you ride on. But for me, I just like that feel that you get, that really nice soft feel that you get from a very high TPI cotton that you have in the tire. So when you go over bumps, you just get this beautiful gliding feel of the bike. You don't feel the actual vibrations coming through the bike. And the other thing that people could also argue is those micro vibrations coming through from these tires that have a stronger and harder sidewall, which have a better hysteresis, then they actually can cause the body to fatigue more. So you need to decide what sort of tire you want to run. You can save your money and have a potentially faster tire on a smoother surface, or you can run a more expensive tire that probably gives you less fatigue, but you're going to have to pay more for it. Well, anyway, guys, that's where I'm going to leave it.